All right. So I just have one question then. No, I'm sorry. Why did I say one? I have two questions. You're asking three. I've got two.
You got three. You got number 2, number 4, and number 6.
Oh, I have 6. That's right. Oh,
yeah.
I'm getting there.
The standard one.
Yep. Good morning.
Steve. How are you, brother?
Happy hump day.
Oh, thank you.
It's definitely a Wednesday. How have you been?
I've been really well, Jess. Thank you. It's nice to see you.
Nice to see you as well. This is going to be we were just talking about this conversation is going to be one of those moments where we're both getting restored within the interview. It's like the meta.
Yes.
Are you all doing this every week?
For the fall, we will. Yeah, we took a little hiatus over the summer, but we usually record once a week and then we release them twice a month. So we kind of get a little bit of a margin.
Nice.
Yeah, I've been doing it for...
When did you all start doing this?
I was just trying to think back to the original date. It was January 2 years ago, right? 2019?
Yeah. Yeah, because
so
we
started
prep. We started prep in 18, right? End of 18 with different players, and then we did our workshopping and then started in 19.
And how did you all know each other?
Well, the Durham is it's pretty small. So Jes was on like 17 boards of nonprofits. So, it was only a matter of time before can you recall? I think it was,
I remember.
It was me coming to American Underground. Oh, yeah.
So the very first time I met Rob was I was working at the American Underground and their corporate whatever partners. And Rob reached out to Adam Klein and said, hey, we've got this idea, a really interesting project. We have a location. You guys do it really well for the startup community. We would love to come and visit and talk about the model and see how you've built the community. And so Rob came over and Adam brought me into that meeting. And that's the very first day that I met you. And then we went over, I think a month or so later, just to look at the space, because I was curious. I think I just went over. And then that was it. I mean, and then ReCity was sort of born and I just stayed connected to the community, and Rob, being the leader of that community, we stayed pretty close and became friends.
Nice.
Yeah.
So then, Jess, we have to know loads of people. Like, we have to be connected to loads of people that we just aren't aware that we're connected.
I'm sure of that. I'm sure of it. Yeah. I actually was on your LinkedIn this morning, learning new things. But I bet if we did a quick LinkedIn audit, we would be shocked.
Yes.
How did we get introduced? Was it Larry Petrovic?
I think probably so.
Okay.
But I've seen you in lots of different places. I know, I know I've talked to Keith Daniel about you.
Keith Daniel, yep.
Mm-hmm. I'm just trying to remember where else. How well do you know Sarita Hill? Do you know Sarita very well?
Oh, really well. In fact, I just saw her last week. She was having coffee with a good friend. I don't know if it was a good friend. A friend of mine. She was having coffee with someone that I happen to know. I just saw her, and she looks great and seems to be moving fast and furious.
Yeah.
With Step Up, since that's your background, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, we had the privilege of hiring her, 5-6 years ago.
Yeah.
And boy, she's just been a gift to the Durham community. So yeah, it's been fun to watch her.
She's doing great. She's great. Well, Rob knows. Rob.
I miss. Yeah.
You probably miss her. Yeah. Seeing her all the time.
I do. I know her coffee routine.
ReCity staple. Yes.
I knew 9:15 was before 9:15. It needed to be really important because she hadn't had her cup of coffee yet. She creates disciplines for when she has her first cup of the day. So
that's great.
I love it. Her kids basically were being raised at ReCity after they get home from school. Walk down the street from Central Park. But
yeah,
Steve, you doing well, man?
Yeah, I'm doing really good.
I got tired reading your bio, so I can't imagine the irony of
Why?
how busy you are here to talk about rest. We're going to have to reconcile that today in this conversation.
Well, right. Like the gift of running a retreat center forces you into that.
Yeah.
Like I'll talk about that some today, but it's such a gift to run that, to be a part of that place, because when I get tired, I just go rest.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just kind of baked into the DNA of the place.
Well, I'm really looking forward to helping people get a better understanding of what it is. I know Jess has.
I've been there
in prep of this. She's been there and participated and done a retreat there herself. Okay. So I'm going to need to check that off my list.
When did you come, Jess? How long?
I was there right before you were there, before you took over, but not too much prior. I'm trying to think of the year. It would have been. Oh, I can do this actually. I can do this math. Larry Petrovic is the one who introduced me. That's why I mentioned Larry.
I gotcha.
And he hosted a retreat in the fall of maybe 16.
Okay.
Maybe 17. And the reason why I'm hesitating is it was right. I didn't know my dad for many years, for 40 years. And I turned 41 and I found my dad, and he had passed away when I found him on Ancestry.com, but I was kind of working through that and deciding whether or not to introduce myself to my new family and all these different things because they happen to be local, ironically. And Larry sent me 3 nudges about this retreat. And the first was like, I don't have time. I can't. But the next one I probably ignored because I already told him I didn't have time. And then the third one, he was like, Jess, he called me. Sent me a note, but then called me and we talked for about 30 minutes. And I happened to share this revelation, and he was like, this is what you need. I think this is why I'm feeling like I want you there. And so it was that fall, and it was several days. It was lovely. It was really transformative for me personally, not as much professionally, because I was carrying in something very personal that I was working through, and it was awesome. And I love this space. It's beautiful. I can't wait to come back. You all are booked. I was trying to do a women's retreat, and it's like, at the time it was like 2 years later or something. And I was like, okay.
It's a pretty popular place.
It really is, and for good reason.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's in good hands. I know that it's keeping you busy, but Rob and I were marveling at how you managed to have several other businesses at the same time.
I'm not running any of those, thankfully. I'm just involved in them.
Okay.
But, yeah.
Still,
that makes it.
Yeah.
It's
a lot going on, sir. Good stuff.
It is a lot. But hey, I think that's going to be. I think our listeners, especially those who feel really busy, will listen more to you because you're having to fight for rest the same way that they're fighting that battle, and I think they'll be able to say, hey, I can see myself in your story a little bit. So we'll make sure to make you sound really busy in this bio so that people are like, God. Okay, this guy knows. Look, this guy knows what he needs. He's got some good rest tips for me. So I'm excited about this. This really, I think, is going to be an asset of a conversation, Steve.
Well, and I'm so glad that you asked me to talk about this because I've thought about this a lot with COVID. Like COVID created unnatural rest for people. Like it forced rest when people weren't ready to rest, right? Like I don't know how to describe that, right? It created these moments of really inconvenience when rest shouldn't be inconvenient. It should be embraced and celebrated. But in our culture, we don't see it as that way. So I actually think COVID had a double whammy against people because not only was it horrifically a struggle from a physical perspective and still is, but it's taken an emotional, mental, and spiritual toll because people we don't value rest in America, and we don't value rest inside the Christian church. We don't do it. And I'm going to give you, as we talk about this, I'm going to give you 6 reasons that Jesus chose solitude over people. And you'll start to go, oh my gosh. I'm looking at this list right now and I'm like, oh my gosh.
I'm looking forward to it, man.
It's pretty convicting.
It's the reason this podcast exists is when the opportunity presented itself. I was in so many conversations with Jes where these events, pre-pandemic, these events where like thought leadership was shared and it went out the door and it was done and it was only accessible for the people in the room. I felt like that. I wanted to bottle that up somehow and make it available in a digital library for more people, so it could bless more people. And I feel the same thing about when you came and did the stuff with David Spickard and the things you're sharing. Hey, that only 5 or 6 people are hearing it, and it's blessing them, but it could also bless more if we were able to have conversations like this. So I'm pumped that this for you. I hope it'll be an asset for you to be able to share when you're trying to nudge people towards being healthy around this. And I think it'll be for Jes as well in her time when she's meeting with you guys, are meeting with people who are influential leaders across the board, business, church, nonprofit. They all need to have this conversation. So I'm excited about it, man.
Yeah.
We'll go ahead. Here's a couple housekeeping things for you, Steve. Okay. We'll try and land the plane here by 11:30. So about a 45-minute conversation. Jes and I will start with a little personal check-in for the first 5 to 3-4 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay. We
each just ask how each other are doing, just to kind of warm the audience up to some of the conversations that are typically on the heavier side. So for that part, you can just be on mute. I think you can hover over your microphone on this platform and just hit mute so that, if you're doing any rustling around, we won't be able to hear you. We won't acknowledge that you're there yet. Once we're done with our check-in, we'll welcome you on, and then you can say, "Hey, how you doing?" And we'll keep it real brief, just to say that your mic is working. Then we'll introduce you to everybody, read your bio, and then we'll jump into the first question. And Jes and I will alternate who asks the questions, and we'll pretty much follow that script that I sent you. And if the conversation takes us, different directions, we can be flexible, but we'll probably try to work through these and may spend more time on some, less on others, and that's totally fine.
And then, as a quick interjection, I have an 11:30 coaching call, so I have to be. If we run a little bit over, Rob, just so you know, you may have to grab the last question, and I would have to jump off. Okay.
Cool. Yep. So yeah, we'll try to land the plane a few before 11:30, but I think that should give us plenty of time to work through these questions. And then just turn on Do Not Disturb, Steve, for your stuff. Computer, phone, and stuff, just in case you're in the middle of a really good answer. We don't have to edit out part of it based on your ringtone. And then the only other thing would be to not say anything that's too time-stamped to today. I know in our culture, it's all like, 24-hour news cycle, but we usually record a couple weeks in advance. So this will go out October 4th, will be released. And so just as an FYI. Mostly we have to keep in mind of that around holidays. Like, don't wish each other Merry Christmas and stuff when it's not happening, or it happened a month ago. So other than that, man, we're good to go. You can go ahead and hop on mute, and then and we'll bring you on after we do our personal check-in. Sweet. All right, Jes, you ready? It'll be me ask you,
and then I ask you. Yep.
And then I'll go straight into reading his bio, and then question number 1.
Here we go.
Here we go. You want to be the one that breaks the silence? I feel like I always do it.
Sure.
All right, you got it.
Okay. Hey, Rob, it's good to see you.
Wow.
For our listeners, we actually see each other on our
for people who follow the YouTube channel, right?
That's right.
A little plug for watching us on video.
Please.
We can see each other.
We can see each other, and you can see us.
That's right. That's right.
If you want.
Excited to be back. It's been a little while. We took a little break, which is going to be a theme for this episode.
Yes.
Let's not get too far ahead of ourselves.
I know it wasn't refreshing though. It was, got to have those times of refreshing, but we'll get there in this conversation.
Yes.
But yes, we did. We took our own upcoming advice. How about that?
I heard the term pod-exhausted, which doesn't feel like it really works, but I'm just going to use it here because I mean, that's a real thing. People can get exhausted in everything. And hey, doing a podcast is no exception. It can be tiring work.
So you can just put exhausted at the end of everything, like Zoom exhausted,
if you can do it for pod-exhausted, you can do it for anything, because that one doesn't sound like it flows together.
That's what I wanted. Yeah. That's basically was my point. Zoom exhausted.
Hey, I said I heard it. I didn't come up with it. I didn't. So you can critique it. It's not hurting my feelings. I'm borrowing it from someone else, so we can make fun of it. I just want our listeners to know.
Yes.
This wasn't my idea.
Was not Rob's word.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you,
friend. Got it. Oh, well, we're back. We're back.
Catch us up on how you've been. Tell us how's been the summer.
Yeah.
Start of fall, all the things. You pick your season. I guess it's too late to talk about winter, so you need to stay more relevant.
Summer was good. It was. I didn't do much outside. So I didn't do the summer things that I'm accustomed to, which is like beach and all that kind of good
It was
stuff.
hot. I think a lot of people didn't do the summer things.
Yeah, and my hair, has only has so much tolerance, and I didn't get it braided. So, I was mostly my hair dictated how much time I
just rub it in. Just rub it in for those of us who have less
hair. Yeah,
turn the knife.
And I put it. It was curly, so it was even more of a thing. Trey's in school. He's doing great. There's lots of stories to tell there for a different time. Maybe I'll spread them out over the next back half of the season. But lots of Trey stories already. And most relevant, as recently as yesterday, had a great event with women from across the state of North Carolina around the topic of today, which is rest, refreshing, living a life of abundance and fulfillment, and that you're worthy of that, and that you're worthy of space and giving yourself breathing room so that you can be and live in the best possible sort of scenario and environment for not just yourself, but for those that you serve, those that you lead, your family and on. And so that was amazing. And I'll give a quick shout out to the women at Blue Cross Blue Shield, because those were the folks that I was with, and they were incredible. And they gave me just as much as I hope they gained from our time together. So it was good. So professionally busy running. Family is great. And I'm really glad the fall is here, because it's my favorite season. And I even ordered, here's a good one. I ordered my Christmas tree.
What?
I had to order my Christmas tree because there's a shortage.
And you're on top of it.
And they won't guarantee that I'll get one. So
this is breaking news. Do we just break news that there's a Christmas tree shortage? Because I don't.
Yes, if you need a live tree. I
follow news, but.
Yeah, if you want a live tree.
You got to get on it.
You got to go ahead and get your tree ordered. And I get 11-foot trees. So part of it is that I get like the unicorns of all trees, right? 11, 12-foot tree. But trees in general are on a shortage. So you may want to go ahead to your local nursery and order.
Wow. This is not the way I thought you would answer this question.
Is it ever?
But actually, when you say you have an 11-foot tree, it makes me think I'm, being as tall as I am, 6'8", I'm always the designated tree decorator for the tall branches.
Yes.
I've had family friends literally bring me over to their house when they're decorating their tree so I can help them decorate the tall parts. So I'm like, you could just get a ladder, but
it's more fun to have you.
It is.
Yeah, it'd be way more fun. I'd be like, come on over. Except that I have a 6'5" son, so I kind of have a similar opportunity to exploit him at each moment.
You don't need a ladder. You got Trey.
I got Trey. Yeah. So tell me, friend, you have a little more news going on, because we're now in school season and your house is shifting and changing. So.
We were joking about this offline, right? Because just before we're recording this, dropped my youngest son, Peter, off to preschool. He just started last week. And, man, that's a change from the last 18 months of the pandemic, virtual school, 4 kids, 8 and under,
yes.
Just figuring out, my wife and I both full-time jobs, like how to make all that work. I'm not so on top of the game that I'm ordering my Christmas tree. So you kind of threw me under the bus a little bit. I was going to brag a little bit. I'm just kind of excited to be able to hear the thoughts inside my own head. Like that's where I'm at.
I think that's a good place.
I think it's a healthy place. Okay. And it just, the noise level for me has gone down dramatically, the decibels, and the rhythms of the fall season are, starting to feel like you can get your head above water a little bit. And yeah, the line of demarcation of like sending that last kid, even though it's not kindergarten, it's still some version of school. Like that's a big deal.
Big deal. Congrats.
It's a big rite of passage. He calls his theme of his preschool class is the Bears. And so this is, I don't know if this is a little boy thing or just a 3-year-old thing, but when we he got home his first week of school, and we're like, hey, tell us what your teacher's name is. I mean, we know what it is, but we're like wanting him to like tell him about his day. And he's like, oh, it's she's the bear. And I'm like, no. So he's in his mind, because he goes to bear class. Like his teacher is
Miss Bear. The bear.
Miss Bear.
She's the bear. We're the little
she's
cubs.
The bear. Yeah.
She's the bear.
So he's taking things really literally these days, but you got to love 3-year-olds.
I think that's a 3-year-old. I love literal kids. That's amazing. Love it.
Yeah. But I'm excited about our conversation today, Jess. We've already hinted at it. We've got a good friend of the podcast, someone that you and I know and love and have been following for a while now. But this conversation especially, I mean, we joked about kind of being pod-exhausted. That's the last time I'm going to say that on this call. But literally, like I think that this role and relationship with rest is something that we've all grappled with in some way, shape, or form. And I think we've got the right guest to have that conversation at the right time. Because if you're anything like us, Jess and I have talked about this online, offline. Like, I mean, the pandemic is caught up to us. If you thought this was just going to be a sprint, it's now turned into a marathon. Like, it has really forced us to reckon with our relationship to rest and how that relates to justice. This is just going to be an action-packed, really meaty conversation. And so we have none other than our good friend, Steve Swayne, who's going to be joining us for today's call. I'm going to welcome Steve on to the podcast. Steve, can you hear us okay?
Yeah, good morning, Rob.
Hey,
Good
Steve.
morning. Good morning. Good to see you, brother.
Thank you.
So, Steve, for those of you guys who don't know, I can't even do this bio in one breath. So you might hear me inhale halfway through because Steve's got a lot going on, which I think means he's someone that knows the challenges of fighting for rest. And so I just want to give you guys a little bit of background for our listeners who may not be as familiar with Steve's work and his career. But he's currently the director of the St. Francis Springs Prayer Center, a role that he started in October 2019, which is a prayer center based and retreat center in north of Greensboro, North Carolina, for those of you guys who are Tar Heel natives who are our listeners. Over the course of Steve's life, he's traversed the nonprofit sectors, the for-profit sectors. He currently owns 3 businesses, a social media marketing company, landscaping company, construction cleaning company. He was the director of Step Up Ministry, which those of you guys remember, Step Up has made a guest appearance multiple times on the podcast. Elizabeth Butler, Sharita Hill. These have been people that have just been doing incredible work here in North Carolina, specifically in Durham. Steve was head of that for 9 years. And over the course of that time, grew it from a $300,000 nonprofit in one city to a $4 million nonprofit in 4 cities. And if that wasn't enough, he's dabbled in being marketing community relations director for 2 NBA teams. We're going to need to know who those teams were and how good they were.
Yes.
It was in the mid-90s. So, I mean, there was a lot. Those are the good years of the NBA right there.
For our generation, right? That's a total generational judgment. Just in the 90s.
It's true. It's true. If you were born in the 90s, then you don't remember those years. But if you were a millennial in the 90s, you remember that there was we could do some reminiscing right there. And Steve lives in Raleigh with his wife, Laura, and their 4 kids. And he's just overall just an amazing person. The whole reason we started this podcast was to try to bottle up some thought leadership that typically just happens in-person events, pre-pandemic. And just really grateful to have this conversation with you, Steve. Welcome onto the podcast, friend.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So I just want to frame up with a couple of statistics that I found recently. I'm an avid podcast listener. And so I stumbled upon these. I want to give a shout out to the Carey Nieuwhof podcast. It's a leadership podcast that talked about a Deloitte study over the summer around our relationship to rest, specifically leaders and their relationship to rest. And so I'm going to frame up this first question just with some of the stats that really raised to the top that were mentioned in this podcast. But the fact that 82% of executives and CEOs that were surveyed reported that they leave the office every day physically and mentally exhausted. 82%. 59% can't focus. 49%, half of the leaders say they can't sleep. The burnout rates are through the roof. And this was in the nonprofit sector alone. They were through the roof pre-pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was every 3 years people are planning their exit because they just can't take it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you have to imagine what the pandemic has done, laying on top all those stressors that have exacerbated themselves. So, Steve, let's just dive straight into this conversation. You know, the pandemic has left so many people feeling beaten down, weary, worn out. But in many ways, so many people were already running at an unsustainable pace beforehand. Maybe it's just kind of raised our consciousness and our awareness of how unsustainable life was and kind of pushed us over the edge a little bit into forcing some rest, maybe forcing some self-reflection. And it caused a lot of people to be at this pivotal moment where they're maybe even thinking about a change in trajectory. What do I want to do with the rest of my life? Because I can't do this anymore. So let's throw it on the whiteboard and just rethink everything. So my question for you is, putting your retreat center hat on, as the executive director of the retreat center, I'd be fascinated to hear what's your take on all this, because I feel like you've got your finger on the pulse of people who are seeking you out, knowing that they need rest.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of how has the pandemic impacted our relationship with rest?
Yeah. So first of all, I would say that, you know, when you think about our culture as a whole, you know, we train people over life. America's just a do culture, right? We just are, and it doesn't matter who you are. It's just ingrained in us that we're to do. And rest really has nothing to do with doing. It has everything to do with being, right? So it's almost the reverse of what you've been trained. And yet when we're honest about it, right? Like, let's just be honest about ourselves. In fact, I did this study of myself a few years ago. I got out a note card and I wrote down the number of times I thought about myself in a day and the number of times I thought about others in a day. Mm-hmm. And I kept a score, little scorecard. And I got tired when I got to 100 because it was 88 times about me and 12 times about someone else. And if we're honest about ourselves, we are all just selfish, right? So we're consumed with self. And what I have seen about what the pandemic did to people, and what I've seen at the center, is that people are being forced to rest when rest should have always been natural, right? It always should have been part of the DNA of each of our lives, but we've never been mentored this way. We're not disciplined this way. And so we come to the pandemic and it's a forced rest, right? We're forced to be in a home. We're forced to wear a mask. We're forced to do these things that it's so unnatural. And what I've observed is it's just created all sorts of mental unhealth and just physical unhealth and emotional unhealth. And because we just have trained ourselves to not appreciate rest. Does that make sense to both of you?
Yes. Yeah. We talk about practice, right? We're not skilled. We practice at things we want to get better at, good at, skilled at it. We're just not, this isn't something that's natural to us. We don't practice it.
I mean, Jess, has anyone ever said to you, oh, I am skilled. I am practicing the value of rest?
Nope.
No.
No one.
It's like asking a man, like, practice the skill of kindness. You ever hear a man say, I'm practicing the skill of kindness? It just does.
Also, no.
No, right. It's not part of the culture we've been trained in. Now, that's not the way it should be, but that's just been my experience the last 2 years of watching people come into the center.
Mm-hmm. Well, I love that. And that's pretty clear, direct and to the point. Like, it's just not our Western cultural norm. And I love that you said, let's just be honest about it, because once you can start there, then you can apply good things to it and make changes in habits to adjust. But if you don't acknowledge the truth of it, it's going to be a hard road.
That's right. And in that, right, like when you think about that example of just counting the number of times I thought about myself,
yes.
How in the world are you going to like care for the needs of others if you are so consumed in your own self?
Excellent point. It's a good practical, at the end of this, we do a what should we do? It's a good practical exercise for our listeners. So this is an interesting topic for the Just podcast because it doesn't, this is so interesting because you just said it. It doesn't naturally seem to fit rest, reflection, and its role in justice, right? It's do, go, change your community. And this topic is saying there is a role that rest and reflection plays in our lives. And so since we have you on as our sort of content expert today to talk about that and give even Rob and I some guidance, how do you see that specifically intersecting with the role of justice? What role does rest and reflection play in the way that in your work, and how does it impact the work of justice?
Yeah. So, there's a multitude of thoughts I have on this. The first is, and I'm just going to kind of go through this real quick. I'd say probably 4 or 5 years ago, as I was reading different things about Martin Luther King, you can't get too far into Martin Luther King without realizing that he carried along Howard Thurman's book, Jesus and the Disinherited. And if you dive into that book and start to recognize what's going on in that book, like you realize that Howard deeply understood the value of rest and justice, that there's this kind of intersection of contemplation and justice. And so in that got me to going, okay, well, if Howard's thinking about this and Martin Luther King was doing it, then what was Jesus doing about it? And there are 6 unbelievable examples of what he did in the course of his life that I want to just kind of cite for everyone. The first is to prepare for a major task. So he was quiet before he went out in the wilderness for 40 days. Right. So he used silence and rest to prepare for a major task. The second thing is he recharged. There's an example in the gospel where Jesus sent out his 12 disciples. When they got back, he told them to go rest. The third is to work through grief. After Jesus learned that John the Baptist had been beheaded, he went away by himself. The fourth is before a really important decision. Right? People don't often equate this, but before he picked his 12 disciples, the whole night before, he went alone and talked to God. And then the next day, he went after the 12. Fifth, in times of distress, right before he's arrested, he's at the Mount of Olives praying, and he's quiet. And then the last thing is just over and over and over again, he focused on solitude because he got up in the morning and had that time where he was quiet. Right? So I just cited 6 examples in which, when you think about it from a justice perspective, right? Like when we're trying to make the world a more just place, preparing for a major task. Boy, there's a lot of injustice in the world right now. There's a lot of injustice in America. So we're trying to tackle massive issues that have existed for 400 years. And how do we tackle major tasks without first resting? To work through grief. I mean, if you spend any time in justice-related work, anytime, you are going to grieve. And you're going to grieve hard because they're just example after example after example where somebody's been hurt, oppressed, killed. The list goes on, right? And so grieving is a huge part of justice work. And then if you are deeply engaged in justice work, as we know, there's just distress everywhere.
Yeah.
Like it's everywhere. And so I just feel like, it's been modeled for us. And yet again, right, like we don't often equate justice and rest in the same breath, but I firmly believe they just roll hand in hand.
That was outstanding.
I think that's really powerful, and like you said, shouldn't be counterintuitive because it's really what we're wired for.
Correct.
But culturally, it's not what we value, and it's definitely not okay to brag about, hey, I'm working on being better at rest, because it's almost like there's an assumption that you're being lazy. And
right.
When you look at justice work, I would say that space itself, if you care about it, there's maybe even just as much pressure, if not more so, to not be seen as someone who is you got to just go. The needs are too great.
Correct.
And when you use examples like that, as a Christian, when I'm striving to model my life after the life of Christ, like 3 years of ministry on earth, the amount of time he rested in that time, when I juxtapose like how my calendar compared to his and how much, I would have been too busy in my mind. I got to keep going. And yet he valued it and at such a premium with such a few years to do what he was, which if you're a Christian, the greatest job description in the history of the world. How much of that time did he spend in rest and reflection?
I mean, regardless of what you think about Jesus, right? Like whether you, like just at a basic level, he was a good person, right? Like even if you don't believe that he's the Son of God, right? Like, okay, so in that, if you still look at the principles of what he just like did on a day in, day out basis, preparing for a major task, recharging, working through grief, important decisions, distress, and daily time of quiet. Like, it doesn't matter what institution you're rolling through, whether it's work, church, nonprofit, you name it. Have you heard this 6 before ever? Like stressed as a priority? No. No, we don't. No. These are not priorities in any space that we're in. And so I see that every day because when I'm at the center, I just see it. People are rolling in and you can just see it on their faces. You just see it.
Tell us more about, that's a great transition. Talk about the folks who come to the center. Give us a snapshot in the day. Not that this interview can replace the experience, but give people just an example. What the people that come in and you see them limping in, physically, mentally, spiritually. Tell us about the work of how the center comes alongside of people, and what you see as the biggest impact when they leave, on the people that you're serving.
Yeah. So I would say we try every day to do 4 things really well to prepare people to just get at themselves. And the reason why I say get at themselves is oftentimes, right, like if we go back to the original premise that we're selfish, when you are coming to any place, it doesn't matter whether it's a hotel, your own house, when you're coming to a place, you're typically looking at all the things that aren't going well. You just are. We've been wired to go, oh, the food wasn't very good, or oh, the flowers don't look cared for, or there are weeds in the grass. It's just amazing how we look for the negative in everything. And so all I've said at the center is we're going to do 4 things really well. You're going to be hard pressed to ever hear us say no. We're going to be incredibly hospitable. We're going to serve great food. Your room is going to be incredibly clean. In fact, the whole center is going to be incredibly clean, cleaner than your own house by far, but cleaner than hotels. And then the fourth thing is we're going to create beautiful grounds for you to just walk around and be in nature, right? So if you do those four things, from my perspective, you just take away all the excuses. Like the excuses just disappear, and the person is just forced to deal with whatever is just rolling in and out of their emotional, intellectual, and physical bodies. And it's clockwork. I mean, clockwork. And I don't have to ask anybody. You see it on their face. They come in, you see crinkles, you see just stress, you see a hurriedness. There's just all these things. And they leave, and it's like, oh, when can I come back? How do I? So that's the gift of the place.
I'll jump in here. This is a little off script, but I was transported back to my time when I was at the retreat center. So far, I guess I've been there. It was several years ago. And that was sort of a life-changing revelation, a personal life-changing scenario that I was trying to work through, and had the opportunity to attend the center. It was very transformative. And you're right. You do walk in with this, you just said all the things, which is kind of a phrase that I use a lot. All the things. And then you park your car and you realize that you're just not in Kansas anymore. It is a totally different environment as soon as you get out of your car. It's quiet, you hear nature immediately, and you're just kind of moving through the energy that is there, that is greeting you. So you kind of move through the space. It is beautiful. The grounds by far were my absolute, like the memory that I have the most is being able to walk and move in the woods and over in the trails and over the bridge, and just the things that were the discovery in the wilderness. It's not wilderness, but the trees, the grounds, the chapel, just incredible. And so you're right. I think you take somebody, you pluck people out of their day to day, and you place them at the retreat center. The way that you have it set up, the methodology of removing the barriers that we innately put in front of us just because that's what we do, right? You remove those, and people are forced to deal with themselves. Yep. And that is exactly what my experience was. And it's why I was able to have a transformative moment in an important time in my life. And, I give all the credit to the team and the staff there. And so I really sort of just want to give you a personal shout out from my own experience.
And when you think about that, like what you just described, and again, I ask myself this question all the time, is why can't we do that in our own home? Mm-hmm. Right? Like, why can't we create what you just described inside our own home every day? And again, it goes back to how we've been formed, the normative culture. And so as I'm trying to just unpack my own life, I've just realized that I'm going to just try to do things different. Like, it's just going to be, if you say A, I'm going to try to do B, right? Like, and so it's, you try to get out of this cycle of being consumed by a culture that just is go, go, go.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, eventually at some point, everybody kind of hits that breaking point where they're climbing up ladders, and the ladders are shifting on the walls, and they're going in different places. And you eventually go, now, why am I climbing up this ladder?
Mm-hmm. And where am I really going?
Right. Where am I going?
What building is this ladder leaned against?
Another ladder, and you're like, what am I doing?
Yeah.
This is crazy.
Yeah.
And some people never get to that. Some people just keep trying to climb up ladders and climb up ladders and climb up ladders. But it's just exhausting and empty.
Yeah. Well, let's circle back to your sort of commitment at the center around justice is it's a core value. And I'm real big on core values. I talk about it a lot, that these are these immovable moments. These values help you make decisions. Your core values inform your decisions. And so you have created an environment within the center and with your team that justice is a core value. You even have an equity scorecard so that you can measure your progress on that. That is unique. And I'm curious how did you get there? Like, what's your own personal story? You know, you could have picked, there's a lot of values out there, Steve. Justice is a core value. Help me get there. And I assume you have something attached. That's a personal journey for you.
Oh, no question. So you can't, I don't believe that you can really firmly start to understand the depth of the injustice in the world without first suffering deeply, right? Like we've created a culture where people are striving for comfort. And so ultimately that somehow has to be disrupted, because why would you when you think about the dynamics of slavery and you think about the dynamics of that economic institution, because slavery really, let's just be honest, was an economic setup.
Yeah.
And it was simplified through color. So when you think about that, all it was doing was trying to get one body of people to get ahead at the expense of another body of people. So that's our whole, like I'm not saying anything that's not true. That's like our whole setup, our whole like frame of 400 years is there are going to be people on top and there are going to be people at the bottom. Well, that doesn't sound real just. Like that sounds like counterintuitive to, when I just read the 6 items that Jesus was kind of up to, like it doesn't sound real kingdom focused. It sounds very hierarchical. And, what we've realized is that because you've got this dynamic in play, for my own life, it really shifted when I took a racial equity class probably 10 years ago. And it really helped me to understand just the dynamics of benefit that were in play for me historically, that I worked hard. I benefited from these things, but not everybody got that same benefit. And how do we change that? Well, I think in any situation that any person ends up in, they ought to try to do things to tweak the way people see life. So through the help of some consultants actually in Durham, we created a racial equity scorecard, very similar to a health and sanitation score. So when you walk into the center, you see a health and sanitation score of, right now we have been blessed to get 100. Right below that, we are going to put a racial equity score. Now that score is not going to be very high. It's going to be 20, maybe 25, and that's okay. Like, I'm not trying to beat anybody up. What I'm trying to do is to create this question. What is that? Because most people in white America aren't going to have any idea what a racial equity scorecard is. They're not. It's not common language. Now, a person of color is going to walk in and go, ooh, hey, tell me more about this.
Yeah. What's that measured against? Give me the quality.
Like, well, how did you do this? Steve, did you do this? Oh, no, I didn't do this. This was created by consultants, people of color. But what it's going to do is it's going to force conversations where white people are going to say, hey, what is that? Why do you have that? Why is that important? Why is that right next to a health and sanitation score? Well, then I'll say, oh, I'm so glad that you've asked. let me show you the score. This is what we're trying to become, to be a more just center, a more just society, a more just and compassionate entity. And to me, it always goes back to, I'm going to read this to us because I think it's really critical. Henry Nouwen wrote a book called Compassion, and I think it is just so critical to the very essence of justice. And it says this: compassion asks us to go where it hurts, to enter into the places of pain, to share in that brokenness, fear, confusion, and anguish. Compassion challenges us to cry out with those in misery, to mourn with those who are lonely, to weep with those in tears. Compassion requires us to be weak with the weak, vulnerable with the vulnerable, and powerless with the powerless. Compassion means full immersion in the condition of being human. And if I'm going to be fully immersed in the condition of being human, like, I don't know where else to do it but in America's original sin. Like, where else you're going to find 400 years where a whole body of people, both black and brown, have been taken advantage of? So to me, the center just seems like a really natural place for people to come, both white, black, and brown, to understand and to actually like be in relationship with each other.
Thank you. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, I love that's really powerful, Steve. I think a couple things, especially around that, how you've named that equity and equity scorecard. One, I love that your main takeaway is that you just want people to ask why it's there.
Yeah.
I think that's really powerful, in that your goal is the conversations that it starts.
Correct.
I also love that you're not waiting to get to a number that's high enough to be respectable. Oh, yeah, well, I'm going to get it once it's in the 90s, we'll post it. No, I'll post it whatever the truth is. You know, if it's at 20, the goal is not to make us look good; it's to start conversations.
Correct.
And I think that's really refreshing, because I really feel like a lot of folks, when it comes to this term that has really become much more normative now than it was several years ago in equity and in the cultural conversation, I still feel like it's pretty buttoned up oftentimes, especially in the business settings, where it's like if you're going to wade in those waters, it's because there's cultural pressure to do so. But if you're going to do it, you're not going to really admit weakness. You're never going to give yourself a score of a 20. You're going to wade in those waters to pat yourself on the back in what you're doing, because you're not really trying to pursue it. You're really trying to get credit for the pursuit, and look good doing it, which I think it just feels so different the way you describe it. So as we land the plane here, Steve, I'd love to give our listeners, you're not describing a quick checklist of things to just go do today. You're talking about a way of life. You're talking about literally becoming more human across the long haul.
That's right.
So you may answer this question very differently than some of other guests who talk about other issues, but we love landing the plane with just one thing that people can do to show up and take a practical step towards a healthier relationship to rest. If you had to think about and narrow it down to one step they could take towards becoming more human in this category, around this issue, what would it be?
Well, right. Like when you think about your own life, if you showed me your calendar and your pocketbook, I could tell you who you are. Right. So you think about that, right? Like, like that's pretty, like I'm not going to show anybody my calendar and my pocketbook. Ugh. Right. Like that gets a little, right. Like that becomes a little uncomfortable. But when you think about life, it always comes down to priorities.
Yes.
And so what becomes priority really starts to define who you are. And so I would just say, and it doesn't matter, I've always said this, it doesn't matter if you do it in the morning, the midday, the evening, but there is a beautiful rhythm to rest. because what rest does is it not only just helps us deal with our own junk, but then we start to realize, like, golly, like, what am I doing? I'm so like I got to go help somebody else. Like, this is crazy. Like, why am I so consumed with self? And in rest, you start that ability to get outside of yourself. And so, wherever you're at, take 30 minutes a day and just stop. And whether it's a good book or it's just you're going to sit in silence, and whatever comes to mind, you're going to kind of wrestle with that. I heard this great quote from Tim Cook, who runs Apple, that he wakes up every morning at 4:00. And from 4 to 7 is his time. It's his time. And he chooses it how he wants, but it's his time. Nobody's bugging him. Nobody's going at him. He is able to do the things that he needs to prepare for the day and all of the things that are coming at him. And I think that there's a lot of wisdom to that, right? And I guarantee you in there, if I was asking Tim Cook if some of that time included resting for himself, the answer would be yes.
Yeah.
More valuable rest than sleep.
Correct.
Right. Because
I love that. And Tim, I was reflecting on Tim Cook, because during that time, he does not negotiate his fitness, wellness, just making sure he's getting his time in the gym or whatever. And I read somewhere he actually goes to a gym. Now, this is the CEO of Apple. He should have a full gym in his house. But I reread it several times. He leaves and goes to the gym. And the reason that struck me was just, I'm thinking, he makes a choice to do that. So he's physically leaving his home. He might, I don't know if he's walking, running, or getting in the car, but either way, he's thinking on the way there and on the way back. Like, he's building in time for himself that is very intentional, because he could make that extremely easy for himself. He's not. And he doesn't compromise it. It's every day.
Yeah.
Which I love.
I'll say this to end, and this might sound strange to people, but that's okay. A lot of times I find rest in cleaning. So like when I'm at the center, like I'll go clean 10 bathrooms, because there's this rhythm of just like doing something over and over again. That's not hard. It's simple. You're just in details. Rest doesn't mean you have to just like shut down.
Be idle. Right. Yeah, it doesn't mean idleness.
You're just doing something that's rhythmic, that's forcing you in silence to think about things, pray for people, be in space where there's this rhythm happening and there's nothing else going around outside of it. And so I have found some of my best resting times are just in cleaning toilets. And it's just a real gift.
Excellent.
If you're wondering whether you're climbing the right ladder, just take 30 minutes and go clean a toilet. That's
the summary for today.
I think that's what I'm walking away. That's a sticky metaphor right there. I don't mean that. Steve, thank you so much. This is something that I'm going to go back and listen to over and over. I feel like I need to create a rhythm of returning to this conversation, because we need reminders. We need people like you who are thinking deeply on these things and yet also acting practically and pursuing these things actively. So thank you for this conversation. Thank you for the gift it is to our listeners. And we're grateful for the work that you're doing and that you're practicing what you're preaching.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome.
It's great to be with both of you.
You as well. Thank you, Steve.
All right. Take care.
Awesome.
Take care. Bye-bye.